Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
Guilty, then not guilty? How is that even possible? Bryan Kohberger's case appeared to have a clear direction until everything changed. But there is something important you need to understand. Kohberger has not been declared not guilty. He was convicted after pleading guilty to murdering 4 University of Idaho students. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Then, nearly a year later, he made an extraordinary move.
Shocking twist in the Bryan Kohberger case is now trying to withdraw his plea and stand trial.
Now he's filed a petition to withdraw his guilty plea.
And now, the case that once appeared finished is back in the courtroom. So what happened? Why did Kohberger plead guilty in the first place? And why is he now trying to undo the decision that put him behind bars for life? Before the legal battle, there were 4 people whose lives were suddenly taken. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They were University of Idaho students living, studying, socializing, and building their futures in Moscow, Idaho. On November 13th, 2022, all 4 were murdered inside a rental home near the university campus. For investigators, the question was immediate. Who had done this? The crime scene generated a massive investigation involving Moscow police, Idaho State Police, the FBI, and other agencies. Detectives collected physical evidence, surveillance footage, digital information, and thousands of tips. One piece of evidence would become especially important. A knife sheath found at the crime scene contained DNA that investigators pursued as a possible route to identifying the killer. Investigators eventually focused on Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student at nearby Washington State University. On December 30th, 2022, Kohberger was arrested in Pennsylvania.
I hereby sentence Mr. Kohberger as follows. On count 1, burglary, 10 years fixed, 0 years indeterminate. I also impose a fine of $50,000. Count 2, first-degree murder of Madison Mogen. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 3, for first-degree murder of Kaylee Gonsalves, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the victim. On count 4, for the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 5, for the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim.
But Kohberger did not plead guilty immediately. For more than 2 years, the case moved through hearings, motions, and disputes over evidence. The prosecution's case was built around multiple categories of evidence. Among them was DNA associated with the knife sheath recovered at the crime scene. Investigators also examined cell phone data, surveillance footage, and other evidence gathered during the investigation. The defense challenged aspects of the state's case during the pretrial proceedings. Kohberger maintained his innocence as the case moved toward trial. A trial was eventually scheduled for 2025. And if that trial had happened, a jury would have been asked to decide whether the state had proved Kohberger guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But the trial never happened. In 2025, the direction of the case changed dramatically.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
On July 2nd, Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty. The agreement changed what could happen next. Prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. In exchange, Kohberger agreed to plead guilty to the 4 murders and burglary. The agreement called for 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 10 years for burglary. He also agreed to waive his right to appeal. There would be no jury trial. No jury would hear the entire case. And many questions that might have been explored during a trial would remain unanswered, including one question that has followed this case from the beginning. Why? The judgment meant that Kohberger would remain in prison for the rest of his life unless the conviction were later changed through a legal process. For the families, the criminal case had reached what appeared to be its final chapter. But it wasn't the final chapter. Then came July 2026. Nearly 1 year after pleading guilty,
Yes.
Kohberger filed a handwritten petition asking the court to allow him to withdraw his guilty plea. His argument was dramatically different from what he had told the judge in 2025. Kohberger claimed that his attorneys had not adequately represented him. He alleged that his plea was not truly voluntary. He also claimed his lawyers pressured him with promises about prison conditions and frightening descriptions of death row. And he pointed to evidence he says was not adequately investigated or disclosed to him during plea negotiations. One example he raised involved hair recovered from the crime scene. But these are Kohberger's allegations. They are not findings by the court. This is where the headline can become misleading. Kohberger is not currently legally classified as not guilty. He is a convicted murderer serving 4 consecutive life sentences without parole. What he is asking for is something different. He wants the court to undo his guilty plea. If the court ultimately grants that request, the conviction could potentially be vacated and the case could move toward a new trial. But that has not happened. As of August 14th, 2026, Kohberger remains convicted and incarcerated. The legal question now is whether he can meet the demanding standard required to undo a guilty plea after sentencing. Under Idaho's criminal rules, after sentencing, withdrawal of a guilty plea requires a showing of manifest injustice. Kohberger's petition does not automatically reopen the murder case. The court must first consider his claims. And because his allegations involve his original defense team, a new attorney was appointed to represent him in the post-conviction matter. If his petition fails, his existing conviction and sentence remain. If he succeeds, the case could potentially move in a very different direction. But there are also questions that remain unanswered. Will the court allow him to withdraw the plea? Will the case ever return to trial? And if it does, what evidence would a jury ultimately hear? For more than 3 years, the Idaho murders have raised questions about evidence, motive, justice, and accountability. In 2025, it appeared the case had reached its conclusion. A guilty plea, 4 life sentences, no possibility of parole. But now, the man who once told a judge he was guilty
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
is asking the court to let him take that plea back. That does not make him legally not guilty. It means the legal battle has entered a new chapter. And the question is no longer simply, who was guilty? It is whether the guilty plea that ended one of America's most closely watched murder cases can now be undone. And until a court decides, that question remains unanswered.